Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dina Weiss. I serve as the Chief of Staff for the Secure Community Network. We're honored to have all of our attendees and panelists here today for a conversation on cyber preparedness for the high holidays. This is the final webinar in our High Holidays Preparedness series as we approach the Chagim at the end of this week. A couple notes before we get started today. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to our registrants after the call. All of our attendees are muted and do not have video, but you're welcome to put any questions into the chat or the Q&A function. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll turn the call over to Michael Masters, the National Director and CEO of the Secure Community Network.
Thank you for joining today's High Holidays Safety and Security webinar for community leadership, where we're going to be focusing on the issue of cyber safety and security. Due to multiple requests and reflecting the environment many of our congregations and synagogues are operating in, this is the second webinar on cybersecurity, and as all of us are aware, starts just days before the Chagim. I'd like to recognize our co-sponsors, the Jewish Federations of North America and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, under whom SCN was formed, as well as our other sponsors, partners whose organizations form the center of Jewish life during the high holiday season in communities across North America. The Orthodox Union, the Rabbinical Council of America, the Reconstructionist Movement, the Union for Reform Judaism, United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and Hillel International. I'd also like to recognize the many professional Jewish community security directors around the country. Coming from intelligence, law enforcement, and military backgrounds, each day these professionals are working full-time to keep our communities safe. SCN's honored to work with our 146 federations, 50 partner organizations in the conference, and over 300 independent communities, as well as many of you who are joining us on this call to ensure the safety and security of our community. We are strongest, safest, and most secure when we work together. And today's webinar is a reflection of our community coming together. While COVID-19 has impacted almost every facet of our lives to include how we think about and how we practice the high holidays, one thing it has not changed is the threat facing the North American Jewish community. Amidst pandemic-related lockdown measures, as well as targeted information and disinformation campaigns regarding the current social and political situation with the US, we have seen an increase in online hate and anti-Semitism, to include rhetoric being shared amongst extremists through various forms of online communication. Our recently released High Holiday Threat Assessment, developed in coordination with law enforcement, as well as other critical national partners like the ADL, noted these increases in threats. Our partners at the FBI have arrested near record levels of domestic terrorism suspects since the beginning of 2020, from foreign terrorist organizations to domestic violent extremists, from individuals who support Islamist extremist entities to white supremacists, and from the so-called Islamic State to QAnon, we face a complex and dynamic threat environment. No space is safe. As more and more organizations have moved online, as many of our synagogues and shuls have transitioned programming to the virtual environment, we've seen an increase in cyber attacks, harassment, and crime directed at our organizations in our online spaces. Recognizing that reality, the purpose of today's webinar and the accompanying materials that we have released are to allow organizations to be in a position to limit the likelihood of interruption during services and to have a plan on what to do if that occurs. Please know there are many steps we can take to minimize the likelihood of an incident, and we must. Just over the last several days, we've seen events occurring everywhere from our urban areas to our rural communities. Cybersecurity spans all of our organizations. In our efforts, we are not alone. SCN serves as the official liaison with federal law enforcement at the United States Department of Homeland Security. When it comes to safety and security, our partnerships with the federal government, to include DHS, are stronger than ever before. This is possible thanks to the strong leadership within the department, particularly at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We are joined today by the Assistant Director for Cybersecurity for the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. In his role, Mr. Ware leads CISA's mission of protecting and strengthening the nation's critical infrastructure against cyber threats. Previously, Mr. Ware served as the DHS Assistant Secretary for Cyber, Infrastructure, and Resilience Policy. In that role, Mr. Ware was responsible for leading DHS policy development in support of department-wide efforts to reduce national risks, with a focus of critical infrastructure cybersecurity, federal network security, countering cybercrime, and improving the security and resilience of the global cyber ecosystem, as well as national resilience initiatives that enhance federal, state, and local government, as well as community preparedness and response capabilities. Needless to say, in this environment, he He's very, very busy, and we're very grateful for his time. Prior to joining government, Mr. Ware was an entrepreneur founding an artificial intelligence company, which he led as CEO through multiple rounds of venture capital investment until it was acquired by Haystacks, where he later served as CTO for several years, during which he helped grow the company and make it into one of the leading cybersecurity entities in the country and around the world. We look forward to hearing from him. He truly has incredible subject matter expertise, having been issued multiple patents in artificial intelligence and mobile technology. I want to recognize the many demands on the Assistant Director's time, from ensuring the cybersecurity of our electrical grids to our elections. This is an incredibly demanding role, and we're grateful to have him for just a few minutes. It's my pleasure to welcome Assistant Director Brian Ware.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was quite an introduction, and I'm flattered. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all this afternoon. Yes, it's been a bit busy times, but I think that it's a unique opportunity. I spend a lot of my time talking with other governments, other countries, some large corporations, but I welcome and enjoy the opportunity to touch the fabric of our society, and in this case, the Jewish community and religious institutions in particular. Just honored to have this opportunity. Let me just give you, I want to give you some perspective on what we're seeing in the threat environment that I think are the areas that you should pay attention to, and try to point you towards some resources that may be of benefit and of help. So the first thing, and I'm not going to tell any of you really things that you don't probably know intuitively, our threats have changed. The cyber threats have changed inside of the COVID environment. We have an increase in volume of threats, and we have old threats that are kind of given new life and repurposed because of the COVID pandemic. So really what I mean by that is criminal actors have used what we call phishing. So this, fraudulent emails, those have been used for a long time now, but now we've seen them shift their tactics so that these fraudulent emails have a COVID theme to them. So we have seen emails impersonating World Health Organization officials. So those kinds of, they look like a credible source that's kind of lures people into clicking on malicious links. We've seen adversaries target the financial pain that individuals are in by trying to impersonate, look like these are the IRS, refund checks, and so kind of going after people that are in vulnerable situations and going after their finances. I wish there were more and better things than we could say about phishing, except to say, all of you, your community have to be cautious. We have to be on the lookout. We have to be careful for things that are asking for personal information where really personal information isn't required. We need to be looking at company names and addresses to see if they're off kind of typographically, if they're looking like that, they're trying to look like Microsoft or an Apple message, but they've been slightly altered because it's an imposter. These links are designed to steal personal information, so steal identity. That identity can be used then to take out new credit or to compromise accounts. They are sometimes used just to steal money. So we've seen fraudulent personal protective equipment advertisings and other things. They're just made to steal money. And so we have taken down thousands of these sites with our partners in law enforcement, thousands of these actors, but they're easy to pop up, they're easy to execute, and particularly in these challenging times, they're successful more often than we would like in being able to get us to click on that link or open that attachment and again, steal identity, conduct an illicit transaction, or get us to download some what we call malware, some harmful software that embeds inside of your computer or your network for other purposes. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to call out. I think the second thing, not completely unrelated, is ransomware. We are seeing an increase in ransomware incidents. Here again, I wish we in government were doing more, but this is a very hard and very challenging problem. Ransomware is used primarily by criminal actors, very sophisticated organized crime rings, and in some cases, some hostile nation state actors, using usually spear phishing or phishing. So usually with an email that's targeted to look like something genuine, they're able to install this malware on a computer, sometimes spread throughout networks, and encrypt that computer, so lock all of its contents up until a ransom is paid. And increasingly, we're seeing ransoms paid. The reason that this threat is growing is because they can make money from it, and it works. But it is dangerous. It can lock up entire businesses. It can lock up manufacturing lines. It can lock up your cloud providers. It can lock up your computers in your synagogue. And so, again, this one is a challenging one to prevent. Oftentimes, the key is that suspicious or fraudulent email on the way in. I'm going to hold to the end some resources, but we do have some resources for you to try to prevent and be ready for ransomware. I think something that Michael really touched on in his opening comments that I just wanted to also give you some perspective on is the environment that we're in right now. The social unrest, the political division, and then putting those on the international stage where our foreign adversaries have interests in these divisions and sowing division and sowing discord and discrediting democracies. We're seeing foreign actors impersonate movements in the United States. This was written about in a number of reports and spoken about by a number of my intelligence and law enforcement colleagues, the way that they've used Facebook and Twitter and other things, again, to put false narratives out there, to ultimately to sow discord, ultimately to call question to our democracy, and to divide the American people. I mentioned this to you because we have seen recently cases of impersonation of religious officials on social media. I can't speak too specifically about the cases, but very high profile religious leaders whose Twitter accounts have been taken over, or who have had a authentic looking copy of their Twitter accounts made, but under the control of a foreign adversary. And this, in the case that I just was working, it was Russian government impersonating a large Christian denomination's ultimate leader. And so I think that we all need to be careful. We need to be educating our communities, educating ourselves about being careful to see what is new, of not falling victim to spreading false news ourselves and feeding into our adversaries' goals and objectives. But for each of you whose social media presence is part of the way that you reach your community, be careful with who has access to those accounts. Change the passwords, have secure passwords. If you are highly visible, work with the providers, Google, Apple, Twitter, Facebook, so that they, all of them can provide enhanced security and enhanced monitoring. The blue check mark in Twitter, to give you some additional protections, and be diligent. In one of these cases that we've just seen, the actual Twitter account was completely fine and not compromised, but a fake one had been made. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that so they can spread information. They're doing that, in some cases, adversaries are doing it so that they can impersonate you, again, to take over an account. They can impersonate you to get one of your followers to believe that they're interacting with you and do something that they're controlling them to do. So wanted to take, and I probably wouldn't have mentioned that if Michael hadn't kind of said what he said in his opening remarks. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the way that we're operating right now. 60% of Americans that are working remotely. It's even more percentage of our students that are in class remotely. I go to church all the time, and I've only done that remotely since March. I guess what I'm saying is that through this pandemic, we have come to rely on distributed learning technologies and teleworking technologies in ways that we never wanted to, never had to before. But they're allowing us to operate our economy, and they're allowing us to stay connected with our congregations, with our families, with our friends, with our teachers. What we've seen across the board, from very large organizations to very small, are mistakes made in the haste to move into these new platforms. What we would call configuration errors, standing it up without all of the security bells and whistles or all the security checkboxes in place. We are also seeing our adversaries figure out how we're working and target the way that we're working. This is what they do. And so they are, we have seen a shift in 2020 of adversaries targeting all of the virtual work platforms that we're using as their primary area of interest. So when we shifted to teleworking, our adversaries shifted their activities to those teleworking tools. And so we have to be extra diligent. And so I just wanted to make all of us aware that we have to be careful. We have to use these tools. We have to make the most out of these tools, but we've got to be careful there for the ways that we use them. So let me make a few recommendations beyond the ones that I made on the social media sides. We recognized the environment that we're moving into, like early this spring, and we set up a new part of the website. So our website is CISA for CISA, CISA.gov. If you go to CISA.gov/telework, or usually it's one of the first banners that are up there, we have guidelines for chief information officers and chief information security officers. Most of us don't have one of those, but we have guidelines for them on how to configure these products and select and buy these products. But we also have products that are designed for small business owners, which many of us kind of are like small business owners, as well as for end users. And those things tell us how to implement the best practices in these products, the kinds of things that we need to be doing as we're using them. So I saw a question right before I started to speak about Zoom bombing, right? So making sure that when you set up your Zoom, it's set up with a password required. When they're not with a password, anybody can come in. That you set up your Zoom meetings with the waiting room function, so that you've got the ability to monitor who's coming in and let them in when you're ready. There are features in each of the products that are on the market that you don't have to use, but if you do use them, it's going to increase your security. It's going to reduce the impact of some bad actor interfering with your service or your meeting, and they'll also help protect your privacy and the privacy of your congregation. And so I just wanted to point out that telework guide. And then last but not least, I believe tomorrow morning, don't hold me to that, but in the next couple of days, we will be releasing a ransomware guide. And again, our target is tomorrow morning. It'll go out through some media, but also be on our website. We jointly developed this guide with an organization called the MSISAC, the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. I think it's an important guide for you because MSISAC really supports state and local governments, and some of those local governments are really small institutions that don't have a whole lot of cybersecurity budget, and it's not really what they do for a living, and so you can't have fancy plans for big enterprises. And so I think what you'll find in that ransomware guide are some things that may not apply to you, some things that may be hard for you to do, but a number of the recommendations in there are ones that will decrease the risk of you being impacted by a ransomware event, and give you some of the guidelines and checklists on what to do in the event that you are impacted. I spent Monday of this week at the FBI we were reaching out to businesses and local law enforcement all across the United States about ransomware. I spent Tuesday at the Secret Service with law enforcement and state and local governments from across the country, educating them about ransomware. We have our CISA Summit is going on right now with a panel on ransomware. It's a big deal. You're doing right now one of the most important things to prepare yourselves, and that is listening to somebody talk about it, having an advocate that knows how to connect you to the Department of Homeland Security and law enforcement, so that we're able to we want to be the first call that you make, or your first call can be to SCN, and their first call will be to us, so that we can help you if you have one of those kinds of incidents. So, Michael, that's probably more than you wanted me to say. I'm probably a little bit over my time, but thank you for the opportunity to speak to this audience today.
Brian, thank you so much, and thank you for the partnership. For all those on the webinar, we are going to release that ransomware guidance that Brian mentioned out through the network, so that everybody gets it. MSISEC's a great organization, great partner, as is, of course, CISA and all of DHS. So as the assistant director, we're very grateful for all the work. And please know that when reports come into our duty desk for the community, when you report those, we're coordinating directly with the NCIC, which falls under CISA and is their reporting mechanism on a whole variety of levels, along with law enforcement if and when required. So that connection is being made, and we appreciate the partnership. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're going to share some slides and move into the rest of the presentation. And I'm going to move rather quickly to turn it over to my colleagues. We're all here for an obvious reason. 5781 is upon us, and we want to make sure that the holidays are conducted in a safe and secure manner. The threats that we're facing, and I'm not going to spend very long on this, but if we look at those issues and concerns, that those Zoom bombs, the intrusions into limited intrusions into other platforms that we'll talk about substantively during the rest of the webinar, we're seeing the postings from white supremacists and neo-Nazis, racist, lewd statements, the sharing of pornographic images. And of course, this is not just merely disrupting the event. This is our sacred space. And so it is really, we need to make sure that we guard it as such, just as we would if we were sitting in shul or synagogue and we were making sure everyone was safe in the building. We have to make our online space feel safe and secure for everyone as well. And as we said, the threat is increasing dramatically. I'm not going to go through the statistics, but they demonstrate a significant increase in cyber issues. These increases are paralleled with smaller organizations and particularly nonprofits. Just hours ago, the FBI, the Department of Justice, indicted 5 cyber actors based in the People's Republic of China who pursued over 100 different organizations and individuals, to include those in government, healthcare, hospitality, and non-government organizations as well. So this is an everyday occurrence that law enforcement is working on, but we need to be proactive on the front end. And if we go to the next slide, just very quickly, we're going to talk today about, we've discussed the security risk landscape, we're going to move to prevention tips and specific information on a variety of platforms, is what Dina will cover as well. Just to spend a quick moment on the actors that we see. Nation state actors, funded, supported by nation states who are aggressively targeting and trying to access public and private sector networks. Their motivation can be political, economic, espionage. We have cyber criminals as well, and hackers. Cyber criminals, largely profit driven. They target data to gain it, to sell it, to hold it for ransom, as Brian mentioned, or the hackers who are often hacktivists specifically, who are ideologically motivated And then lastly, terrorist organizations who are typically trying to target organizations to be disruptive or harassing in nature. One last thing that I'm going to mention on this, it's the motivation or intent should be balanced against their capability. So there's a lot of people that are highly capable, students at MIT, for instance, but they don't have intent to undertake an attack. So we're always thinking about that balance. Unfortunately, as Brian mentioned, when we've transitioned to these online platforms, we see basic safety and security steps not being followed. It allows a relatively unsophisticated actor, but who has bad intent, to disrupt our high holiday services. So the goal today is to give some simple, quick tools that can really enhance the security of our online platforms in a substantive way. And while bad people are always going to have intent, we're going to decrease their capability dramatically to infiltrate and disrupt our high holiday services and our events moving forward. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Brad Orsini, who serves as SCN's Senior National Security Advisor, veteran of the United States Marine Corps, 28 years plus with the FBI, and then served as the first Community Security Director for the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, our great partners. My colleague, friend, Mr. Brad Orsini. Brad?
Thank you, Michael. So I just want to very quickly enhance what Brian talked about at the very beginning and the vulnerabilities that we all see out there. And I'd like you all to think about this in two buckets, right? Human error between email phishing schemes and insecure passwords. Now that accounts for over 42% of the cyber intrusions that we see across the country. And I can tell you, as we monitor all the cyber intrusions that we see across the Jewish community, most of them have emanated from email phishing. And then Dina is really going to drill down on those Zoom bombings and how to keep you all safe and secure during the high holidays. But it really begins with taking this information to prevent that phishing, to have those strong passwords, right? Over 42% of these attacks are human error. And so if you look at the other vulnerabilities that we have, and Brian really talked about the configuration of your system and poor patching, and I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of this, but we all have these websites, and we're going to talk in a second here about how we can keep our websites secure. But it really is incumbent upon the leaders of our synagogues, of our shuls, to really take a hard look at our websites to limit exposure. Phishing has really attacked our organizations. We have lost money in our nonprofits, and we really need to grab hold of that issue. And I'm not going to spend any more time on phishing, but we all need to understand that. What we have done for you all, and if I talk about now what we can do to prevent these attacks and what you can do as an individual, let's drill down a little bit on that. Dina, if we can go forward a little bit, please. What you can do for your organization. I think it's really important, first and foremost, whatever shul you represent, whatever organization you represent, you really got to talk and understand what social platforms you're using. Do you have a dedicated website? Do you use Facebook? What are you using out there that we need to monitor? And once we identify that, who's controlling our websites? I have spent so much time since I retired from the FBI doing assessments in our organizations. And I not only do physical assessments of our buildings, of our organizations, we also take a look at your cybersecurity. And I will tell you, every Zoom bomb that gets notified to SCN, every Zoom bomb that I help our organizations facilitate a law enforcement response, one of the first things I do is look at that website and really see the deficiencies in the website. And we're going to just drill down on that a little bit, because we have probably configured our websites with too much information and making it very easy for hackers. So first and foremost, we need to control or understand who's coming in and out of our website, and to look for anomalies, look for something strange. Who's looking at our websites? Why is somebody from, overseas looking at our website of Temple Bethel in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? That is important for us. that's a red flag, and we got to understand why somebody's doing that and what they might try to be doing. When we talk about our online profile and our organizational digital presence, we need to have policies and procedures, good, strong policies and procedures to really keep those hackers out and make sure the exposure to our websites it's not as high. Now, I look a lot at our nonprofit websites throughout the country, and one of the first things I see is we list everybody that's involved in our organization, to include the president, to include the vice president, to include our chief financial officer, to include our accounting department. That is really kind of a blueprint for hackers to get into our systems, right? We're identifying who that controller is, who that CFO is. And so when Brian talks about phishing, that's how these hackers get in. So we need to limit that information we put on our websites. So important for us. And I've also seen websites, and we'll talk about this right at the end before I turn this over to Dina, we're putting personal information on our websites. I am Rabbi John Smith. I live in San Francisco in a particular area. I have 2 kids. They go to the day schools. We do not want to put that personal information on our websites. Again, another blueprint for hackers to invade our websites and really kind of obstruct what we're trying to do. And on the back end, whether they're stealing logins, whether they're stealing credit cards, whether they're stealing our donor base. And then at the end, if that's that ultimate phishing scheme where they are just by one letter off of our organizational leader requesting money, and we've seen this happen across the country. So it's really important. So if we're talking about high holiday services, we want to limit that public-facing content, right? So I really advise synagogues that we should really think through how we communicate the high holiday season with our congregants. We do not want to put the Zoom link right on our website. Think about changing to have a congregation only button in there where they have to log in. Our dues paying members log in and they can get the information. They can sign in from there, and really controlling that information is so, so very important. We want to do that, especially now in this COVID environment. Folks, this is not going away anytime soon. We're going to continue to use these online platforms. So we really need to take a hard look at our security procedures and really lock them down. One of the most important things we could do is create that really strong password. We always want to use no less than 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, special characters. Use passphrases. Don't have a limit just to 8, but just really have a very long and a hard to figure out password. You'd be probably not surprised to know that most people out there, and I bet there's somebody on the online right now, use some version of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in their password, right? We're making it way too easy. We want to always have 2-factor authentications in our systems to really control and have more proper security. And I'm going to just keep this as simple as I can. Don't share your password with anybody. Don't write it down and put it in your top drawer in the shul office for somebody to walk in here and really obtain that password. Use those password managers and really think through this. Avoid reusing passwords. Have a system where we review these passwords, change the passwords every 60 days, every 90 days. And please do not use the same password for your personal bank accounts, for your work accounts. That is probably one of the worst things we can do, right? We want to make sure we back up all that data in the cloud. So if we do get attacked, we can really garner all our information and we know it's secure. And it's really so important for us. And really, if you get an email and you don't know who it's from, throw it out. And especially if you open up that email, do not click on any links, plain and simple. And when in doubt, throw that out. I just want to spend 1 minute on really talking about how to lower your online profile. And we see this, Dina, if we can just go to the next slide, please. That issue where we have so much information, and I talked a little bit about this. They gather that information from our online footprint, and we do have ways for you to remove a lot of that information from the website, and we'll put in the chat room, and I'll put this in there, those websites that you can go to remove data from the internet. You have all these users out there that buy and sell emails, URLs, and that's how you always see these advertisements. Once you're looking for a sofa, and the next thing you know, you're on Facebook and you see 20 advertisements for sofas from 20 different organizations. That we want to limit our profile. And lastly, that Facebook challenge, and I know we've seen this through COVID, and I'll just use one example that is really the biggest one that we saw a lot of fraud and hackers exploit. When the class of 2020 was graduating this year during high school, you know, of course, we all felt bad for our high school seniors, our college seniors. And there was this Facebook challenge out there that said, post your high school, post the year you graduated, post the high school you went to, and share that with us. Well, quite frankly, that is not a good thing to do. We have now given Dina Weiss's picture out there, her yearbook picture, where she went to high school, where she lives, and now that gives hackers something to look for. So that every chance we can to limit our exposure on the internet. We live in the internet world now, but we need to be careful. We need to really reduce how much personal information. We will be sending out a cybersecurity checklist after this, along with the recording, along with the slides. That cyber checklist will really go through this from soup to nuts to give you a flavor of what it is. And it's a very basic checklist. You do not have to be a cyber expert. If I can follow it, folks, anybody can. And with that, we're now going to turn to what you're really here for with Dina on how we secure our online presence when we're conducting high holiday services. Dina?
Thanks so much, Brad. So I've seen a lot of questions coming through the chat. We'll do our best to move through this quickly, but also comprehensively, and then leave time for as many questions as we can cover. So a lot of people have already referenced in that Q&A Zoom as a platform. That's exactly what the assistant director referenced. And we know that a lot of people, as we're looking at the observance of the high holidays, that Zoom is a preferred platform for a lot of people, and how a lot of us are operating, and obviously where we are right now. So a few just general comments about the Zoom platform and what we can do to best secure ourselves on it. Up front, the most important thing I can note to everyone on this webinar is that the Zoom webinar is the most effective way to avoid unwanted content, interactions, and interference. The Zoom webinar, as everyone is aware who's on this right now, keeps attendees from unmuting themselves, from starting their video, and creates a lot of controls between the presenters on a Zoom meeting and those who are attending. So it really just creates this layer of security that a general meeting does not allow for. But there are a lot of things you can put in place, whether you're hosting over a Zoom webinar or a meeting. One thing to note about the webinar is it does require an additional license. So it's just something that if you don't already have that in place, it's something that your account administrator would need to look into. Either way, with a webinar or a meeting, one thing you absolutely should be doing is requiring registration. You can customize the registration to whatever extent you like to collect as much or as little information as is necessary or appropriate for your event. But it is a great way for you to be able to collect information about those who are planning to attend your event in advance. And that's also how the event link is distributed. Anyone who registers, you can either have them automatically approved, or you can go through the manual approval process to really ensure that extra level of security. But you will have that information about every single person who has the ability to then access your event, because that's required in order to create that unique link for them. In addition, this is something the assistant director mentioned as well. You want to passcode protect your meetings, and if you are choosing to host over a meeting versus a webinar, definitely want to use the new randomly generated meeting IDs. Every user does have a personal meeting ID through Zoom, but that is a static number. It does not change. So anyone who gets access to that number then has the ability to enter that room at any point, and to really open yourself up to some vulnerabilities with that approach. So definitely want to select what you see on your screen here, that generate automatically meeting ID, and then require a meeting password. You can make that as complex as you like. And one thing to note with that, when you're setting up a meeting or a webinar and including that passcode, you should not be sharing that passcode at the same time that you would share if you were manually sharing the link to anyone. If they receive that link, the passcode is actually embedded in that, so they don't need both. It's really just an extra layer of security. But if someone were to access the link and also have the passcode sitting in front of them, they would be able to get in without having to go through the registration process, and that is a vulnerability you'd be opening yourself up to. So one note on that. Once you're in the meeting, there are some things you can set up to, again, limit the potential for a bad actor to take advantage of your event. So one thing you want to do is limit who can share your screen. You should set it up so that only one person can share, and that it should be the host who's sharing. You can, there are a few settings I'll talk about that allow, multiple individuals to be able to share, but it's limited to those who you trust to have that access, rather than having it open to any attendee being able to take over the screen and share potentially problematic or disturbing content. In addition, there are a few other settings that you should look into before you start any event. There's a file transfer setting that's usually, you can find that next to the chat. It should be disabled, most likely, especially for our high holiday observances, unless you have a specific reason. Just best practice to turn that file transfer off so no one can drop in any kind of problematic content or other cyber threat to you. In the same way, the chat function, you can see here, these are all screenshots from what it looks like when you go in to change these settings. The chat, you can choose that there's no chat available at all from the participant side, or you can limit who the attendees can speak with. So recommend looking into that, and based on your event, making decisions that are best for you. Again, to limit the vulnerabilities. A couple other settings you might want to pay attention to are the whiteboard and annotation. Those also exist in the meetings, not webinar functions. And those are also places that if a bad actor were to gain access into your meeting, that they might be able to take advantage and put up any kind of disturbing content using those features. So again, generally recommended to just turn those off, especially for our high holidays. So the best thing you can do as a host for a meeting is familiarize yourself with the security features. So what you see on the screen here is exactly what it looks like when you're the host of a meeting or a webinar. The security shield that you see on there is where all of the major security features are housed inside of a meeting, and you can see that's expanded, that allows you to lock the meeting, enable the waiting room, and make the decisions around all those features I just mentioned, sharing screen, chat, etc. Make sure that you know what all of these look like, where they're located on your screen, and if you need to use any of them, you have that familiarity then. One other thing I'll note, you can see on the bar there, there's the record button. Recommend that everyone records their meetings for a number of reasons, but not least of which is if you should encounter an incident, that recording could be one of the best resources that the reporting agency can receive from you. So if you take nothing else away from this, I would say the waiting room feature is one of the most valuable. I did get a question prior to the webinar, and I think it's important to address, the waiting room is incredibly useful and can help you keep out the bad actors before they could ever become a problem. In the waiting room, what you're able to do is screen all of your attendees before they are allowed in, and you're able to chat directly with them. They aren't able to chat back to you, But what you can do is you can make requests of them. You can ask if someone signs in with, their iPad and you can't identify who that individual is, you can ask them to change their name. And before allowing them into the meeting, they can make that change. And so the waiting room gives you that that extra layer of security before allowing any potential problems or unknowns into your event. Another option you have is to lock the meeting once all the attendees have joined. Again, you can see that in the screenshot on the side where that's located. One thing to note with the locking the meeting, once it's locked, even someone who you invited, who you want to have access, if they're not in already, they won't be allowed to join. So just make sure if you are monitoring that and choose to lock the meeting, that you have all of the preferred attendees in your meeting, so you don't have to deal with anyone who's trying to get in and can't. Another really important feature to know is how to mute participants and stop video. On the side of your screen, when you're the host, you can see all of the participants in your meeting or your webinar. Again, with a webinar, it's not relevant because they don't have the ability to start their microphones or videos, but you have that ability in a meeting as the host to turn off those features. Again, this is not only for potentially problematic content or issues, but also sometimes people just forget to mute themselves or turn off their video when appropriate. And so you can help just control your meeting generally with those features. Finally, this is something I referenced previously. You have the ability to designate a co-host who has the same level of administrative control as you. And this is a great feature if you're interested in being able to share your screen, but as the host, you're also leading the meeting or something along those lines. It's really great to have an additional set of eyes, ears, and hands who can help control the meeting, who can help address issues, questions, etc. If you are multitasking, as so many of us are. So I know that we had several questions come in about what to do in an incident. If you can avoid ending a meeting, the best way to do that is remove the participant. As I said in the previous slide, you have that ability, and it is in the same place where you would mute or stop the video for an individual. You also have the ability to remove that person from the meeting. Again, lock the meeting so that that individual or others are not able to come in and continue to cause a problem. And then the most important thing you can do after that is report the incident. And I will turn it back to Brad shortly to provide more information on reporting. As I mentioned before, if you record the meeting, which we highly recommend, you can then share that information with the reporting authority, and that's tremendously helpful. If you are unable to continue the meeting, if it's too disruptive, highly recommend that you end the meeting and report the incident. You can restart the meeting, especially if it is a meeting. You have the ability, Zoom will keep that link live for you for a little while, and you can restart that. But again, turn on that waiting room, screen the people who are coming in, and that will be the best way to ensure that you don't have an additional disruption. So we have a couple of other platforms we want to cover just very briefly, because I know that there are a number of virtual streaming options that people are looking to for the high holidays. Streamspot is one of those platforms that we heard from our partners that many synagogues and shuls are looking to this year. If you joined us for our first cyber webinar back in August, we had a representative from Streamspot speak about this a little bit. Very broadly, Streamspot is very much unlike the Zoom platform in that there's no two-way communication. So it really does eliminate a lot of those issues that we've seen with Zoom. It's entirely front-facing, as you can see. And so the biggest concerns you'll have with that are really the proper setup and bandwidth. And Streamspot provides dedicated support to make that all happen. So really all of the issues that we've addressed with Zoom won't exist with Streamspot. So know that they are a resource and recognize how many synagogues are looking to them to help their high holidays in this very unusual time be as meaningful as possible without a focus on the technological issues. So just very briefly on that. And then I know we had a question about Facebook Live, and this really does apply also to YouTube if some are looking to YouTube streaming for their services. So with Facebook Live, you can stream through a number of different platforms to Facebook Live, or you can stream directly from Facebook. A few of the things you'll want to do if you're employing this platform, you'll want to look at the comments. There are a lot of settings you can determine prior to setting that stream into live, and that would be around adjusting the comments. You can limit, who is able to comment on your stream while it's live, and you can see here I pulled out some of those that might be most applicable to our synagogues who are streaming via Facebook Live, around limiting how frequently someone could post on a given stream, or disabling that commenting feature for someone who doesn't follow the account, or who followed the account within the last 10 minutes, that sort of thing, so that if someone happens upon your stream and is intent on causing a disruption, or putting problematic content into the comments, or what have you, Facebook allows you to set that up front, so you don't have to deal with those issues. Again, like with Zoom and designating a co-host, highly recommend that you designate an admin or someone who has controls to monitor the stream, so that if you do encounter any issues, they can address them as quickly as possible. And again, if a disruptor joins that stream, utilize the block feature. It's there for the admin in the controls once the stream is live. So again, really just being familiar with all the platforms is really the best thing you can do. We have a couple days before the high holidays start, and so now is the best time for everyone to take a few moments, get into your Zoom webinar or your meeting, try out all the features, make sure that you're familiar with it and that you are comfortable, so that when it comes time for us to join together for the Chagim, we're really focusing on the content and our observance, and less concerned about the technological issues. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Brad to cover the reporting component.
Thanks, Dina. And so what is so important, and I just want to reemphasize one point, and this is the FBI agent and me coming out, please record your services. It's going to save you trouble on the back end. We want to give law enforcement, and especially the FBI who investigates most of these Zoom bombings out there, the best evidence possible to stop any other attacks. We've linked a lot of them across the country. We've seen this happen, so if we are recording, that's better. If it does happen to you, and before that, let me just make one recommendation I think is very important. For those of you that are streaming from an empty sanctuary or from your home, make sure you have enough administrative support to follow through, to capture, to help, as Dina talks about with the waiting room, just to help the rabbi or the cantor out. It's going to be very important. We really need to think through that. And if you do have an incident, we want you to report that right away to local police. We want you to report that to your local FBI office. We're also giving you the link to our Homeland Security partners, but we want to make sure we get that information in law enforcement's hands as soon as possible. We also are going to ask you, if you have an incident, we will help you through our duty desk at SCN to help facilitate a response as well. I was on the phone with an affected rabbi this morning who was Zoom bombed. I also then turned to contacting the FBI in that local town to help coordinate that effort to get a good, robust law enforcement response. Law enforcement will look at these. They do take them serious. I've talked to FBI and law enforcement all across the country. There are many active investigations on Zoom bombings, so we just need to have that proper protocol to give law enforcement the best chance. Report it to us. We will help you out. We have security directors, over 50 of them across the United States. If you don't live in a community that has a dedicated Jewish communal security director, make sure you reach out to us and we will help facilitate that response as well. Dina?
Thanks, Brad. So we know that there are definitely questions, so I'm going to stop here and try to get through as many of those as we possibly can. And I know that my colleagues were helping answer some of those questions as we went through. For YouTube, I mentioned with YouTube, there are a few questions about that. It's a very similar setup to the Facebook Live. And one thing I failed to mention, I think hopefully is a valuable takeaway for everyone, is all of these platforms have comprehensive guidance that really is tremendously helpful. And so again, before we embark on these observances, go to the platform provider, go to their website. Zoom has it, it's highlighted for you. It's also included in the cyber best practices resource that we will share with everyone after this call. But they've laid out all of the security features and how you enable those. And so again, take the time to go into your platform, enable a session in Zoom, enable a meeting, set up a live stream through YouTube, and try out all of the features in advance. That way you're familiar, you know what it looks like, and you can run through how you might respond to a potential incident with that. So highly recommend that you take a look directly at the platform for the guidance that they've developed. They all recognize that there are a number of issues, as the assistant director noted, where we've seen this uptick in bad actors infiltrating our spaces, and all of our platforms are trying to support an uninterrupted and good experience for everyone. I see there's a question about the passcode information. So very quickly, I know we're running out of time. In the link for a Zoom webinar or meeting, if you enable a passcode for that meeting, if an individual registers for that meeting or webinar, the passcode will actually be embedded in that link. So if they click through directly from the link that they receive after registering, they won't need to enter the passcode. The only way that would be different is if someone received things in 2 separate batches or doesn't register. And so that means if someone were able to gain access to a link and didn't register, they still wouldn't be able to get in because they wouldn't have the passcode. So that's why you don't want to send out the passcode and the link together in any way. Don't post them, don't email them, because that's how someone who doesn't register is able to get into your event potentially unwanted. I know that we're up against the hour right now. Apologies that we couldn't get through all of the questions, but as we noted, this webinar is recorded. We have resources that we'll be distributing as well, resources on the securecommunitynetwork.org website. And again, all of the platforms we mentioned today also have resources. SCN is here to support you and be helpful as we enter this unique and somewhat challenging high holiday season. Most importantly, I want to wish everyone a Shana Tova and a happy, healthy, peaceful, meaningful holiday season. And we look forward to working with all of you in the years to come. And thank you again for joining today's webinar. Have a great day.